which is Ted Kury, the Director of Energy Studies at the University of Florida. So with Ted, we're transitioning from the universities to from the labs to the universities. And Ted is the Director of Energy Studies at the Public Utility Research Center at the University of Florida. There, he's responsible for promoting research and outreach activities in energy regulation and policy. In his capacity as director, he develops research strategies that inform the academic community and practitioners on emerging issues and best practices, and serves as an expert resource for regulatory professionals, policymakers, and service providers in Florida and around the world. He teaches in Perk's flagship 2-week program on utility regulation and strategy, and with Sanford Berg, Perk's online course in regulatory impact analysis. He also conducts Perk's 1-week advanced course on energy pricing and customized training programs around the world. And he's been featured on CNN, Fox News, NPR, the Wall Street Journal. He holds a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Florida. Ted, it's a pleasure to have you join us. I can attest to the value of the work that Perk does. We have frequently sponsored the participation of regulatory officials from around the world in your programs. They always come back smarter and more thoughtful about the work that they're doing. And when we work with the utilities in their countries, we find that the level of engagement and discussion that they have between each other has improved tremendously after participating in the Perk courses. Pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, William. We really appreciate it. I just want to take a minute to echo some of the comments that other folks have made. For everybody here at Perk, very sorry to hear of Barry's passing. Barry's work, all of your work at USEA is instrumental in allowing Perk to do some of the things that we do. And we will miss him, but he leaves behind a very strong legacy. So thank you to everybody at USEA for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm going to be focusing on a couple of initiatives, hot topics nowadays in the energy sector, but I want to warn you, we're economists, we're not engineers. So we look at things more from the policy side, from the economic standpoint, not so much from the technologies. So a little bit about Perk for those of you who may not be familiar with some of our work. We are what's known in university circles as a soft money center, which means we don't receive funding from the state government or the federal government or the university. We basically earn all of our revenues through the projects and the programs that we put on. So we have a component of research. So sponsored research programs, we've done over the last couple of years, programs for the Florida State Legislature on the whether the Florida Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act remains in the public interest. We looked at the impact of a carbon price on electricity and electricity generation in Florida. We've looked at barriers to energy efficiency and water efficiency for multifamily dwellings, which we have quite a few here in Florida. Also, as William mentioned, we have our standing programs here in Gainesville. We have a 2-week program. We give that twice a year. We've had 3,000 folks from over 150 countries come through that program since that's been around. And we have a number of other standing programs, and we have a number of in-country programs. Just before the pandemic led to a series of lockdowns, we had just returned from St. Lucia, where we put on a course on solar integration with NREL, as a matter of fact. And so we're always glad to have those types of opportunities. We also maintain, with funding of the World Bank and the Norwegian Trust, this online research, the body of knowledge on infrastructure regulation. This is a freely available resource for anybody that's interested in any aspect of infrastructure regulation. We've had recent additions regarding the regulation of state-owned enterprises, fragile states, and renewable energy and energy efficiency. We got to thank the Norwegian Trust for that one. So this is a research and practical tool utilized by regulators and utilities all around the world. So universities have their hands in a lot of different things right now, and in a way we've got the advantage of not having to deal with the day-to-day issues of keeping the lights on and making sure that people are safe. So that allows us the luxury to step back a little bit because we don't have the practical realities to deal with. And when I was thinking about two topics to talk a little bit about today, two of the things that came to mind were COVID and solar. You know, little bit some similarities in the way we're dealing with the two, but some important differences too. So I thought that offered an interesting counterpoint. And where I'm going to focus is a little bit on some of the utility and state policy responses to the COVID pandemic and what that means for the sector going forward. And then artificial intelligence, machine learning, and universities all over are looking for different ways to apply those types of tools. And I'm going to talk a little bit about an application that we're working with in taking a look at unregistered solar installations and how we can use some of those tools to perhaps improve on some of the methods that we use for that detection today. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our policy responses to COVID. And the primary response for utilities and states, countries around the world has been some sort of moratorium on late fees and disconnections. The form has differed depending on where you are. In some cases, it was a result of a governor's order or something that was initiated at the regulatory commission in a lot of states, Florida being one of them. There was no formal guidance from the regulator or from the state government. The utilities actually just decided to do it on their own, or the city in the case of a municipal utility, or the board in case of a cooperative utility, took that initiative on their own. And so this is a map current as of a couple of days ago that NARUC and the National Regulatory Research Institute maintain of the various state policies. And you can see that a number of pretty populous states, New York, Pennsylvania, they don't have a timetable for when they're going to be lifting these moratoria. California is only saying sometime in 2021, but again, no firm date. So this is an ongoing policy for a lot of states. Some states, though, as you can see, mostly in the South, have started to lift some of these policies. But it's been very interesting to take a look at what happens next. I mean, once you've lifted these policies, you've got some degree of arrears. And we don't really know what the impact of this is yet. We don't have any kind of centralized data gathering effort. The only one on a state level that I know of is North Carolina, where they've got the utilities filing regular reports on arrears. A couple of weeks ago in Florida, we had a workshop with the Florida regulator where the utilities were talking about some of the impacts. So we don't really know how much money is involved here, but it's certain if we can scale up the numbers we're already getting from North Carolina and from Florida and then from scattered utilities in the Midwest. If we're scaling that up, one thing that's pretty certain is this is going to be in the billions, these arrears, and it's not free money. It's not gonna, someone else is not gonna pay this bill. This is actual service that was provided, and some people didn't have to pay for it, or there were no late fees associated with paying for it. But that money's gotta come from somewhere ultimately, because these are regulated utilities that have the statutory regulatory right to recover their cost of providing service through the rates they're charging their customers. So when we're looking at the question of how are we going to deal with these arrears, we're only starting to scratch the surface. Got a couple of broad statements I think we can make so far. I think the two basic categories that our cost recovery mechanisms are going to fall into is either direct assignment, that is a situation where the person who actually incurred the cost will be responsible for paying it back, whether that's through a low interest or no interest loan on their electricity bill, so they pay it back in installments over time, or whether there will be some sort of government support for the money they owe. So direct assignment, I think, is looking like many utilities and municipalities' first choice. But keep in mind that these are folks that were not being disconnected. Normally they would have been disconnected from service if they couldn't pay. So if once the moratorium expires, if they simply don't pay and then they get disconnected, well, now you can't directly assign the costs anymore if they stop being a customer. So now you're starting to look at socialization methods. So a lot of utilities are talking about creating regulatory assets that they will then include in the rate base, depreciate over time, just like any other physical asset in their portfolio. But what that essentially does is takes those arrears and spreads it out among the utility's entire customer base. Another application is securitization. A number of areas are talking about securitizing these arrears. That expands the area of effect from the utility's customer base to all of the citizens in that state or in that municipality. So, we've got a couple of different ways that we're going to be looking at this, but since we don't yet have a complete handle on the magnitude of the cost, and we haven't really started looking at the benefits of what this disconnection moratorium did for folks, it's going to be an interesting challenge as we go forward. Got a lot of tools that we can use to mitigate some of this, but it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with it. We've got some rough choices to make, but one thing is for sure, no such thing as free money. The money is going to be paid back. It's just a question of who and over what period of time. So I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about then solar. Unregistered solar installations are not a driving concern in the United States, but we have folks from 32 different countries that signed up for this forum today, and in a lot of foreign countries, unregistered solar panels are a considerable problem for the system. So back in 2018, Stedin, the grid operator in the Netherlands, estimated that 25% of their solar installations are unregistered. The city of Cape Town last year did a study where they estimated that 70% of the solar installations in suburban Cape Town were unregistered. And the problem with a solar installation that we don't know about is if there isn't any control placed on how that solar was hooked up, there is the potential, it's not a given, but there is the potential for safety and reliability concerns for both line workers on the system and for other citizens. Now, we've got tools today that we use to detect these unregistered solar installations. Typically, it's aerial photographs, and then you train something like ImageJ or some other image processing software to recognize, to distinguish a solar panel from what a regular roof looks like. But it takes time to train these software packages, and there is a bit of error. So this method of detection, while it's pretty well established, it's also pretty well established that it's rather costly. So what we've done is we've looked at ways that we can utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms and data that is a lot more commonly available to utilities. In fact, we're working with just direct billing data from the utilities, which every utility has, and it's fairly, well, the marginal cost of extracting it from your billing system is relatively low, and you're already gathering the data. And can you use some of these algorithms to detect these solar installations? So basically, we've got this algorithm that at its heart uses the billing data, but you can also incorporate weather data, you can incorporate demographic data, basically anything that you would put into a regression model, you can incorporate. And what we're trying to do is see, once we've normalized this household level of consumption, we start looking for what we call structural breaks, a period in time where something has changed from before some unknown event and after some unknown event. Let me give you an example what we're talking about here. This is a rather busy bar graph, but basically what this is doing, it's showing data for a particular utility that we're working with on this project. And it shows, once we've normalized consumption, we've taken every household's consumption and basically assigned them a percentile. You know, are they in the 80th percentile of consumption? Are they in the 90th percentile of consumption? Are they in the 60th percentile of consumption? And for a lot of systems, this is pretty steady. You know, if you're using more electricity than 80% of the other people on the system, you know, that stays fairly stable over time. And if you suddenly drop off, say you drop from the 80th percentile to the 60th, there may have been some sort of change in the system. And that specific instance where you drop from the 80th percentile to the 60th percentile, that would be roughly a 20 percentile decrease in the sample. And you can see that in our sample, that 20% decrease was associated with the installation of a solar panel, a solar system, about 4 times as often as any other reason. You know, a 30% decrease, even more often associated with a solar panel. So every machine learning algorithm starts with some sort of prior, some sort of set of assumed probabilities that you then train over time. And you can use then that machine learning, would set up a set of initial assumptions and then refine those assumptions over time and basically get better at predicting whether this disturbance is the result of a solar installation or not. You know, interesting idea, interesting application of a buzzword that everybody seems like is on everybody's lips at the universities nowadays. So we get change in the energy sector, get new challenges from that. But you know, the universities are working on new tools to meet some of these structural, some of these financial challenges as we go forward. So thank you all very much for your time, for your attention. And I'll be making this presentation available, sending this along to the folks at USEA, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Excellent presentation. Very interesting to hear about research that's from policy and economic sphere that has a direct relevance to both domestic and international issues that USEA and many of its members are dealing with. We really appreciate it. I have a couple of questions. One, in your looking at the effect of the moratorium, are we seeing, as we're seeing in many of the countries that USDA works in, are we seeing in the United States any deferral of investment by utilities that may have longer term reliability implications because of the concern of how this debt will be handled?
Yeah, I think it's certainly that is, there's potential for that. I think we're at the really early stage, though, of figuring out how this is going to be recovered. And as I said, in a lot of states, we haven't even established what the what the price tag looks like. I think a lot of the early utility responses were to take a close look at how their cash flows and cash outflows are being balanced, and what are the types of things that they can do. You may have seen, I haven't seen any direct impact of deferrals of investment, but you certainly saw any instance where a utility could maybe defer paying for something. They took those steps, and that was true both in the United States and a lot of the countries that we've worked with. So there was the usual concerns with, well, how far out can we change our fuel nominations? How far out can we push some of the money that we owe different folks? And certainly infrastructure investment was probably a part of that. The impacts of it, though, I think remain to be seen. But I think your concern is spot on. I just think it's a little bit early. I mean, we still don't even have the total price tag here.
Yes, I appreciate that. I see the same concerns in the countries that we're working in, and I think it is a bit early. But thank you for a fascinating presentation. It's tremendous work you're doing. As I said, we've had a good in the past. I've had really excellent collaboration, and we look forward to doing so and continuing our work with you in the future. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.